Every time that we have one of our public policy lunches, we always try to focus in and highlight something, someone, a key leader, key issue. And every time when I leave, I always say to myself, but I forgot to say what we do or why we do it. So today I thought before I jumped in there and we got going forward with our program, I would just mention to you that everything that we do as an organization is about growing the economy, improving the quality of life. Everything. Any activity, any event, we're trying to add new dollars, new revenue into the economy. But you can't do that if you don't have good public policy. So a big part of who Commerce Lexington is and what we do and what our volunteer leaders guide us on are issues that can have a big impact on whether or not we're an attractive place in which to live, work, or grow a business. So everything we do has to be about effective to have effective, positive economic development, you have to have sound public policy. And that's why we have a lot of volunteer leaders and staff involved both at the local level, at the regional level, in Frankfurt, and in Washington, D.C. Having a seat at the table is really critical. If you're not in the room, you cannot know the discussion, you cannot know the who. So being there, we get to find out who is involved and why they're there and what they bring to the table. Knowing the who, knowing the types of leaders that are there. But also, when you're there, we have a chance to add the business viewpoint, add the community viewpoint that may have been missing. Issues in this last legislative session we were involved with, I'm just going to hit a few of the higher ones. Unemployment insurance, the prescription drug abuse debate. And if you have not been around the region, around Kentucky, around the South, the Midwest, the country, you don't know that the drug issue is getting to an epidemic proportion. Healthcare mandates. The Cairo bill came very close to passing this year, and it was the business community who really pulled together to help stop that. And workers' compensation, just to mention a few. And though these may be a few issues, the price tag is massive, and it would affect our pocketbook and our ability to even have a business that's open, that's viable. So that's why we're there. So we invest a lot in time, talent, to affect public policy. And if you're in this room today and you're part of our Commerce Lexington Public Policy Council, thank you. If you're part of our Central Kentucky Regional Public Policy Group, thank you, because you put in a lot of hours and you invest a lot of time and money in helping us to be effective. If you're a member of Commerce Lexington, thank you, because a big part of your dues goes into our public policy efforts. And then finally, I want to acknowledge, I always come to these things too, and I always forget to acknowledge the person who's our leader, our glue, who keeps everything pulled together amongst all these different levels and entities, and that's Tyler Campbell. So Tyler, where are you at? There you go. So let's thank all the folks I've just commented on. All right, now I don't feel guilty. At the end of the lunch, I can feel like, all right, I finally acknowledged that value piece of who we are and why we're here. Well, welcome. This is our second luncheon in what has become a signature series for us that, quite frankly, when you look around this room, it's a real who's who. And I think that's because of having a long-term sponsor, Kentucky American, who's been consistent, been there at the table for us, and all the other sponsors who I'll comment on here in just a second. And it's been because who's in the room, the private sector leaders and the public sector leaders as well. I do want to acknowledge a few folks here. Dave Atkinson, down here in front, we appreciate your leadership at the state level and all over the globe, it seems like, the things that you do and the Kentucky Chamber does for all of us. Also want to comment at Senator Damon Thayer. There you are, sir. Thank you very much for coming. Susan Westrom, Representative Westrom, thank you. Good to see you. And our Chief Development Officer for LFUCG, Kevin Atkins, there you are. Let's give these folks a round of applause. They are great partners to work with, and we thank you. And here's that one pitch I always put in every time, too. If you're working on a federal issue, you need to be working with the local staff. And if you're not, I'm telling you, your voice is not as effective as it needs to be or will be. You can darn well bet our senators and our representatives, they call back home and they ask staff, they ask these folks I'm going to mention, what's going on? And if they don't know, guess what? You're in a hole before, a deeper hole than when you started out. So I'd like to acknowledge we have Regina Crawford. Regina with Senator McConnell's office. Dan Byens, Dan, there you are, thank you, with Rand Paul's office, Senator Paul. Betsy Dexter and Jeff Reed with Congressman Ben Chandler's office. Thank you. How are you? And so anyway, make sure you plug into these folks. They are always willing to work with you and want to work with you. Today, we're excited to have a federal focus, a federal theme to what we're doing for lunch. But before we introduce our key speaker or have our key speaker introduced, I want to recognize some sponsors. First of all, I mentioned Kentucky American. They have been our longtime sponsor. Cheryl, thank you so much. I'm going to have you come in just a minute, but thank you so much for your longtime support. Our platinum sponsors, Central Baptist Hospital, Life Point Hospitals of Central Kentucky, and PNC Bank. Thank you very much for your support as our platinum sponsors. Gold sponsors, AT&T, Fifth Third Bank, Kincaid & Stills, PLLC, Preston Osborne, University of Kentucky, and U.S. Bank. Thank you, gold sponsors. Our silver sponsors, Bluegrass Airport, Bluegrass Community and Technical College, Bulls Rice McDavid Graff and Love, LLP, Don Jacobs, BMW, Kentucky Community and Technical College System, Kentucky Thoroughbred Association, Kentucky Utilities Company, Northwestern Mutual, Ray Foley Hensley and Company, Sheehy and Associates, Sutherland Associates, Thompson Lexington, The Berry Company, LLC, Traditional Bank, Travel Host of the Bluegrass, Windstream Communications, WKY 91.3 FM, our silver sponsors, and our small business sponsors, Adventure Promotions. I see a little booth there in the back from Adventure. Free Enterprise, Missing Link Managed Services, LLC, MSI Production Services, and Progressive Marketing. Let's give all of our sponsors a round of applause, please. And at this point, I'd like to have Cheryl Norton with Kentucky American Water come up to make a few comments as our presenting sponsor.
Well, on behalf of Kentucky American, I'd like to say welcome to everybody to the luncheon today. And for those of you who are coming from out of town, welcome to Lexington. It's a beautiful city, and I love being here. You know, we've been a presenting sponsor for the entire series of this luncheon, and I have to say that we're always very excited to see who that next speaker is going to be. And as you heard Bob read off the list of all the other sponsors, everybody around here gets the fact that these are very important issues for us, and that the speakers that Commerce Lexington is able to bring to the table is very relevant to our everyday lives, our business lives, and also our personal lives. So on behalf of Kentucky American and all the other sponsors, Bob, I'd like to say thanks to you and to Katie and Tyler for arranging this and having such a great setup for us. We really appreciate that. And Congressman, we really appreciate you taking the time to be here today, and we're very excited to hear what you have to say. We appreciate all the work you've done on energy. Being in the water business, we're one of the most energy-intensive businesses to produce drinking water. It takes a whole lot of power. So we appreciate everything you do on that realm, and we're very excited to hear what you have to say today. So thanks, everybody, and welcome again.
I just got back from an international trip, and the country I was in could have used Kentucky American. Boy, those bottles of water, you can't find them when you need them. But we just need to open up that spout and get what we need. To introduce our speaker today, I'd like to call on someone who has been superhero board member for Commerce Lexington. Her word is gold. I've never seen someone who, when she cannot make a meeting, I mean, she has a call to us just like that, and she always takes it very personal because she wants to be there. And then she'll find out what it was that that she missed, and it's done in duplicate, in multiple, until it's of great benefit for us. So I'm really building up someone who I know I'm embarrassing, just a tremendous leader for us. Chief Operating Officer, Chief Nursing Officer for Central Baptist Hospital, a board member, one of my many bosses, Karen Hill. Karen, if you would come up and introduce our speaker.
No, are you kidding? I'm going to have you write that down so I can give it to Bill. Thank you. Yeah. I really am honored to get to do this today, and I was talking to some colleagues from the Danville Chamber, but Personally, I have to tell you that the hospital gets as much out of our networking with you all who are our consumers and our privileged people to serve as we do when we give back. So we're very happy to be a sponsor. I'm lucky today to get to introduce our speaker, Congressman Brett Guthrie. Congressman Guthrie represents Kentucky's 2nd District in the U.S. House of Representatives. In the recent redistricting, he was telling me he also picked up Fayette and Jessamine County, and I told him this was a great opportunity to introduce him to everyone and for us to get to know him better. Congressman Guthrie serves on the House Energy and Commerce Committee, as Cheryl said, for the 112th Congress. This is the oldest standing legislative committee in the House with broad jurisdiction over energy, healthcare, telecommunications, and consumer products, so something that affects all of us either at work or at home. Congressman Guthrie also serves on the following subcommittees for the ENC: the Subcommittee on Health, Subcommittee on Communications and Technology, the Subcommittee on Commerce, Manufacturing, and Trade. He's recognized for his leadership and has been named the Assistant Whip for the Republican Conference. During his tenure in Congress, he's also served on transportation and infrastructure and education and labor, several passions of his. Something that I found particularly interesting is in 1987, he graduated from the U.S. Military Academy at West Point with a degree in economics, and I looked you up. It's not just economics, it's mathematical economics. So that even impressed me more when I saw that. You have to tell your staff they need to give you full credit. And he went on to serve as a field artillery officer in the 101st Airborne Division, Air Assault at Fort Campbell. And I really appreciate your service as well. Congressman Guthrie later earned a master's degree from Yale University in public and private management. He comes from a small business background, and we were talking about his business relationships in Bowling Green, where he joined the TAS Company in Bowling Green, Kentucky with his father. He was first elected to public office in 1998, and he represented the 32nd District in the Kentucky Senate. In Frankfort, he was on the Education Committee, Economic Development, Tourism, and Labor. You are really well-rounded as a representative. He's also, speaking of being well-rounded, he's married to former Beth Clemens, and they have 3 children, Caroline, Robbie, and Elizabeth. And one more thing that I wanted to tell you, as the mother of an active service member, I looked you up, and I appreciate your support of our troops, and we are really excited to have you here today to tell us what you're doing to represent us in Washington.
I appreciate that. I was talking with Karen just before, or just when I got here, and I said, wow, this is a really great crowd. And she says, yeah, we always sell out. So I guess you would have been here whether I was here or not. So but I do appreciate you showing up at least. Now I got you captive so I can speak to anyway. It is good to be here, and I don't normally tell this because I shouldn't, but I can tell you the exact moment I fell in love with Kentucky basketball. Most of you grew up with it, and just part of your blood. But I was born a little south of Kentucky. I would have been born here, but my mother wouldn't let me, is what I tell people. But when I had a choice of where kids would be born, they were all born in Kentucky. But in 1978, that was a good year for Kentucky basketball. It was also a good year for Alabama football. Another great year for both, right? And so I remember Alabama you won the national championship in the spring of '78. This is the class act of Lexington, people. So Alabama won the Penn State game, 14-7, goal line stand, New Year's Eve, Sugar Bowl, wins the national championship. The next Saturday, Kentucky and Alabama are playing basketball. And the Kentucky band unfurls this huge banner that says, "Congratulations from one champion to another." And I said, is that not a class? That's a group of class people. How many people treat each other that way? Particularly not in politics anymore, do they? But I'm going to have to tell my friends who still live down there that weren't smart enough to come here, they need to get a banner next fall. I guess we play football. Or Kentucky, we don't go down and play Alabama next year. But next time they play football, we need to make sure they do a banner. But it is great to be here. I had Miss Murray in 11th grade speech, and she said, always get the audience interested from the beginning. So I taught Kentucky basketball. The other is I may be the only member of Congress who's a member of Congress in some way because of Lindsay Lohan. Now, before you wonder where that's going, I'll explain it. And I actually shouldn't because she's got some tough issues and we wish her well. But I had gone to China. My family does automotive business, and General Motors invited us to go tour their China plants in Ford. I took my family. And you go over there, and it's amazing what you see. There's an area, if you've been there in Shanghai, that looks more modern than Epcot. And they say 15 years ago it was a dump. It was literally a city dump, and there's like millions of people living, and it looks like something out of Buck Rogers. And cranes, you see everything happening, and I was talking with the Communist Party secretary. I was their official business, but I was interested. So I was talking with a Communist Party official, and of course some of their history is revisionist, but he said the word for China, and I can't say it, and I'm not going to try, but they don't say China. They say a word that means Middle Kingdom. And he says it's not a geographical thing, it's an issue thing for us. He said we believe we're the center of the universe. That's why the Forbidden City's been so grand, because we always believe this to be the capital of the world, and this is our time, this is our moment. And so you leave hearing that kind of enthusiasm, and fly back, all night flight back, and I guess that was the night that, this is where Lindsay Lohan comes in. She must have had an interesting evening, because the first thing if you travel overseas, somebody they just had, you want to catch up on the local news. So I'm being the way I kind of believe politically, I flip on Fox News, and there it was, Lindsay Lohan arrested a second time for drunk driving. But it wasn't just a ticker at the bottom of the screen, it was the panel. It was the defense attorney, the celebrity attorney, the psychologist trying to analyze Lindsay Lohan on television for us to watch. So I said, if that's all Fox News can do after I've been seeing what I'm seeing, I'm going to flip over to CNN. So CNN, guess what? Lindsay Lohan arrested a second time for drunk driving with a different panel. All right, I know Warren Rogers in here, I did it. I said, okay, if that's all I can take on this, I'm going to go to MSNBC. Same thing. And I remember thinking, after what I saw in China, if this is 2007, if this is what we're focused on in our country, we aren't going to be number one. We need to focus on being number one. So I started reading on Deng Xiaoping and all the things that they were doing, and it finally dawned on me they were reading about our founding fathers. So we don't need to be looking at what China's doing to beat China. We need to look at what our founding fathers set for us to beat China, because China will be the largest economy if we don't turn our economy around within the decade, which I think is kind of embarrassing for us as Americans to let this happen. So you start looking, of course, in 1776, a lot of people point out you had the Declaration of Independence was adopted, and Adam Smith published Inquiry into the Wealth of Nations, both in 1776. So the rise of American greatness was giving people political freedom and economic freedom, and tying those together to move forward. And people have talked about, that's not original to me, it makes sense, but it always bothered me when you think about that, because where did the Industrial Revolution really start? England. So if it's really about political freedom and economic freedom, why did it start in England and not here? Well, I finally found my guy. In 1783, William Pitt the Younger became Prime Minister of Great Britain. This was right after the Revolutionary War. So the king, who was powerful, George III, became what kings and queens are now in England, essentially in 1783, and Parliament took over. So political freedom. And William Pitt had studied under Adam Smith, or studied Adam Smith. And the very first thing that he did, they were trying to figure out why they were losing revenue in their tariffs coming into England, and they figured the tariffs were so high, the risk to smuggling was worth it. So people were smuggling to get around the tariff. And so what he did, he pushed a bill through Parliament to lower the tariff. Smuggling essentially became non-profitable, and it filled the treasury for them to move forward in what they did. So that's where so political freedom here, economic freedom here, political freedom in England, also came together to create the world that we know it, wealth like we've never seen. Remember, Adam Smith wasn't a self-help artist writing a book about how to get rich. That's not what the Wealth of Nations is if you read it. It's about how can he was a moral philosopher. He says, how can we create a society where the greatest amount of people have the greatest amount of wealth? It even says you can't judge a nation by the size of its treasury. Like you can't judge a nation because your king lives in Versailles, or Versailles, however you want to say it. I say Versailles here, it's Versailles over there, I know. Since I'm now in central Kentucky representing, not Fayette County, I actually have Jessamine, but I don't have right around Fayette County. But he said it's not about the treasury, it's about the transfer of goods among its citizens. And that's the society that creates the wealth that we have. And that's a society we need to that's what China figured out we were doing. And that's what Deng Xiaoping figured out. Instead of having a 100% tax rate, everything you make goes to the government, they distribute it out and everybody's starving. Why don't we give a tax cut, let people keep, here's your quota, here's your tax. So the tax came first, and you got to keep everything beyond it, and it fed the country. They went from starving to surplus. And so as we look to where we're going to move forward, the question is, how do we move forward? And also, why did the Industrial Revolution stall in England and just create unbelievable wealth here? Not everybody's rich, I get it, but everybody's wealth has wealth compared to anywhere else in the world. And I believe, and I'm not a scholar, hopefully there's a University of Kentucky scholar in here. I wish I was a world-class scholar, because this isn't research-based, but it's my honest to God belief, just from what the reason that we are where we are in the Industrial Revolution in England and is not is upward mobility. We never had the class system. We never understood the class system. We always knew that if we could work hard and do better, that we can move forward. In my business, we deal with a lot of tool and die companies. You go to Germany, most tool and die makers' dads were tool and die makers, and their dads were tool and die makers. So if you're in the trades in Germany, even to this day, really, you're a member of the trades. I've never been into a tool and die shop in the United States, I was thinking this the other day, that wasn't owned by a tool and die maker. So you become a tool and die maker in the United States, go work for a tool and die shop, you figure out, well, I can do this myself and go create your own tool and die shop. Business guys don't start it and go hire them. They pretty much start them themselves. And that's what's made America great. And so the question you have to ask yourself, where are we in that scale of upper mobility? I bet everybody in this room, I'm not asking you to raise your hand, but most everybody in this room, I'm 48, if you're my age or somewhere near or older, you live better than your parents. It's particularly from rural areas. I mean, my mother-in-law didn't have electricity growing up. My father-in-law was actually raised in a log cabin. When I showed the kids the house my dad grew up in, they said, how did all those uncles that you have fit in that house? And so a lot of you here probably have those similar stories. But you ask people today, do you think your children will live better off? A lot of people don't raise their hand. A lot of people wonder if America's best days are behind. And I don't believe that. But the question in Washington, D.C. today is which path to get back to that. Because everybody wants the middle class to prosper. But what path do you go? And I hate pettiness in politics. I absolutely hate anything petty. When churches get petty, when people get petty, clubs get petty, families get petty. But there are big issues going on in Washington, D.C. that are worth big discussions on. And it's really the direction, how are we going to move forward in the middle class? And what role is government in that? Because I think people are feeling uneasy, not in their own confidence, but uneasiness in the confidence of government. And I'm one that doesn't think government creates the wealth for you. So why do I think uneasiness and confidence of government? But it kind of creates the platform for which you move forward. Somebody was just in Uganda the other day, a friend of mine named Jack Kingston, and he said he was in a little shack in Uganda, and he's an appropriations guy. They were looking at AIDS in Africa. And there was this young lady with AIDS, and her grandmother was holding her. And said there was no running water, no sewer, no electricity, and no road. But the grandmother's cell phone went off. And it dawned on me standing there, it says, water, road, sewer, all the others provided by the government, and there's no confidence in the government in Africa. The cell phone is private. So the only thing that worked is what the private industry was able to produce in Africa. And think about that. That's realistic what people move forward. So what is the role of government? Getting to my point, and what policy should move forward. I had a good friend. I graduated from West Point, what Karen just said, in 1987. I was at a graduation dinner, and my good friend's grandfather was there. He was 90 years old, born in 1896, because he hadn't had his birthday at that point. I can do the math, 1896. William McKinley was president of the United States in 1896 when this man was born. William McKinley is famous, sent out a suggestion for reining in the expense of government. It's going on forever. And the head of the patent office sacrificed himself. He sent a note back to McKinley and says, I suggest shutting down the patent office because the steam engine, the car was on the horizon. I can't imagine anything else that could be created. And he was right, because he couldn't imagine it. But there were two brothers in Dayton, Ohio, in a bicycle shop trying to figure out how to fly. I mean, that's the things that you got to make. The government's not designed to create those kinds of wealth and move forward. John Kerry said it, and I'm not political on this, but I think it's important to kind of set up the different philosophies we're moving forward. When George Bush was running for president, again, when he was running against George Bush, and to be fair, he was talking about stem cell research. That's what he was talking, because George Bush didn't do stem cell research. But he said it this way, he goes, just imagine if George Bush was president, we wouldn't have electric lights back in the day. If George Bush was president, we would have candles instead of electric lights. We'd have horse and buggies instead of cars. We would be using typewriters instead of computers. And that's a quote. And I remember hearing that and said, he doesn't get it. We have electricity because of the genius of Thomas Edison. We have cars because of the ingenuity of Henry Ford. And I guarantee if government got involved, IBM would be still getting paid not to make typewriters. But having said that, it doesn't mean we have no government. We have electricity, we got to reach the rural areas, and co-ops and all the different things that have happened in government to make sure people have access to electricity. We don't want everybody to go build their own road. That would be worse traffic than we have already. And we're working to get computers, broadband out to the other areas. So there are things that we all have to figure out and work together to move forward. So what do we do to make America competitive again? And here's the big debates in Washington. I'll give you my idea on 4 quick areas. One is just taxes. And the big decision going on in Washington, D.C., what kind of tax policy do you have? Do you have a tax policy that tries to set what we think is fair in Washington and have people pay what we think is their fair share? And whoever has the majority at any given time gets to decide what's fair. Or do we have a tax policy that promotes growth and economic opportunity and does fund the government? Because we have things, obviously zero tax policy would be the most growth policy, but there are things government needs to do, as I just said. And so what we're trying to do in Washington in the House is try to come up with the right tax policy to be pro-growth and fund what government needs to pay for and allow individuals to prosper and move forward. And you hear a lot of people say, well, we got special interest loopholes, corporate loopholes. Our House budget got rid of those. Now, what we sent to the Ways and Means Committee to go determine what those loopholes and closings are. But we don't want special people coming to Washington D.C. and getting special tax breaks. We want a tax break that works and is permanent. Everything expires end of December. Nobody can plan their future because a lot of the tax code has to be redone by after the election, before the new administration is sworn in or next administration sworn in, whichever it be. And so what we propose is a 28%, 26%, depending on the numbers we've been working with to get the loopholes closed, that generates the same amount of revenue, but everybody pays. Because 35% affects small businesses more. Let's think about if they want to raise the rate to 39.5 on people making over $200,000 a year. Now, if you're a physician making $300,000, you're going to pay most of that 40%, because if you're making $300,000 or $400,000, you're not going to spend $100,000 on an accounting firm to lower your tax rate. But if you're making $10 million a year, you're going to spend $200,000 or $300,000 if you cut it in half from 35 to 17. You get $10 million. That's $1.7 million you save. So when you raise tax rates like that, you really hurt the people that are growing and doing small businesses. We want everybody to be on a level playing field. We want to make it fair. Not fair share, but fair for people to move forward. The second thing that's real important, I got a couple minutes to share this one. I was in this Great Smoky Mountains last summer, and they were recreating this farm. They moved everything out, so you have this pristine Great Smoky Mountains, which they are, but they're recreating an 1800s farm site, so you can see. And the barn is built on stilts. It's a cantilever barn. I mean, literally 8-foot stilts, and the barn sitting on top of stilts, like you would see in Florida or on the coast in case it floods or the hurricane comes. So I asked the guy, I said, that's pretty smart. That'd be hard to do, wouldn't it? He said, yeah, it was really hard to do back then. I said, why do they do it? Does the wind blow through and the hay stays dry or whatever? He goes, no. Tennessee legislature passed a law saying that you tax the first floor of a barn. True story. And so the farmers started building them on stilts. And he says, and I've never been to Amsterdam. Some of you may have been. He says the same thing in Amsterdam. You were taxed on the frontage of your home. So the homes are narrow and tall. I've never been there, but I've seen pictures. So if you don't think tax rates change behavior, they absolutely do change. Who would in the 1880s would build a barn on stilts? Well, the Tennessee farmers did that. The second thing is the regulatory environment. We have to get that under control. We propose a rule that the president said their answer to the Republicans have the economy is dirty air. That's the way he explained our opposition to one of the EPA rules. Let me tell you what it means in Kentucky. Century Aluminum's in Hancock County, Kentucky, on the Ohio River. It uses more electricity than the city of Louisville. Uses more than the city of Louisville. Big Rivers Corporation, which is part of a co-op, will be over the limit for cap and trade if they put this rule forward, and will have to put a $300 million investment to serve one plant. They can't, and what they want to do is put a mercury level that we can't measure. They know you can't measure it. Well, they say is, well, we know you can't measure it, you just have to buy the best equipment, which is about $300 million. They pay average of $60,000 a year. America puts one hourly work. That's good money for hourly work in Hancock County. The American economy puts about 1% of the mercury in the air. Now, if that plant, if Big Rivers can't make that investment to serve that plant's going to move. Aluminum's got to be made. And it's not going to move to California. It's probably going to move to China or Mexico. Now, do you think they're going to put less mercury in the air than we do? That's the kind of stuff that when we try to bring it up, it doesn't even make common sense, that we get those kind of comments back instead of an honest intellectual discussion about how we solve the problems in Washington, D.C. The third thing that I want to hit on is, and I'll answer these in questions, is the debt. I think that's the biggest thing about upward mobility. Margaret Thatcher used to say the problem with socialism is that you end up running out of other people's money. We've already done that, so we're borrowing from our grandchildren right now to do so. The president has a budget that's been proposed. There's two budgets. I'll talk about the president's and the House's. I won't talk about the Senate's because we're still waiting. But the president has a budget that raises taxes on the rich. He does the $200,000 or more, 39.5%. He didn't put the Buffett rule in his budget, but if you throw that in, let's say you throw that in anyway, it's $4 billion a year and a $1.5 trillion deficit. You throw all that in, he doesn't address entitlement programs. That's Social Security and Medicare, which people pay into. I understand that it's different than others, but he doesn't address entitlement programs. And our debt goes from $15 trillion today to $26 trillion in 10 years. There's no way we can get there. We can't get there. We brought his budget up for a vote in the House. It got beat 414 to nothing. Not a single member of the House of Representatives voted for that budget. We passed a budget that did the tax rates, as I said, lower tax rates but closed loopholes that can maintain the same level of revenue. And if you even assume that that will create any economic growth, we didn't. We want a gimmick-free budget. People are tired of gimmicks. People want the truth. People want to know how you're going to get out of this mess. But if you do assume any level of economic growth from that, it'll balance in the next 10 years. But it doesn't even balance in the next 10 years, and I'll tell you why. It's because we grandfather everybody on Medicare. So I don't think anybody here is over 55. I don't see anybody here over 55. Nope, nobody is. But if you're 55 or older, our budget doesn't even affect you. So I guess it affects everybody in here if you're 54 or younger. Because people paid into Medicare, they retired expecting it to be there. So, once you're retired, it's hard to go back and replan your retirement. So we want to grandfather people in. And we've been sort of criticized a little bit because you're addressing the problem just a little too often in the future. But we think that that's fair to people. But we address Medicare. We give people on Medicare who are 54 and younger, when they retire, essentially the same plan their member of Congress has. They say it's going to cost $6,000 a year. I pay $500 a month for our family coverage, which is good. A lot of people like to get that, I understand, but it's not free. We have co-pays and deductibles, and it changes the dynamic that we balance the budget in the next, with about 12 or 13 years, if we assume that getting a handle on the debt and lowering tax rates in a pro-business way doesn't create any economic growth. I think that it will, and we'll balance within the 10-year window. The other thing that you're going to hear, because we just did with food stamps, 28 million people were on food stamps in 2008. Now there's 44 million. Now we've been in a recession, I get it. But a lot of the policies were changed to automatically qualify people for food stamps. So even if you don't qualify under the food stamp program, but you qualify for LIHEAP, which is an energy help assistance for your bill, then you automatically qualify for food stamps. So these people have come on the rolls. Our food stamp policy is this: if you qualify under the way the program is established, you get them, and you spend it on food. We want to have people checking to make sure it's been spent on food. And so we're not radically changing Washington, D.C. in these social safety nets. We're just putting them in place where they work. And we worked, and it saves a lot of money, and we don't hand off debt to our children. If we don't, I want to get to the workforce stuff, but I want to get to questions. The bottom line is this, and this is Congressional Budget Office numbers. If I showed up here and just gave you Republican numbers, you should boo me out of here, because that's not what we're here for. We're about serious things. But according to the Congressional Budget Office, in 30 years, Social Security, Medicare, if we don't change, and Medicaid will be 100% of federal revenues. They will be 20% of our gross domestic product, those three programs. So 80% of Medicaid is spent on seniors. So think about this. I'm a baby boomer, 1946 to 1964. I'm 64. So I'm the end of it. So my parents aren't World War II. I'm a little the end of that. They're a little younger than that. But those of us in the baby boom typically descend from the greatest generation who gave us opportunity. Now think about that. In 30 years, if we don't change, we're going to ask our children, this is what baby boomers are asking our children to do, to wake up every day and go to work for the sole purpose of us being retired. That's what we're asking our children to do. And it should strike us all because that's the current policy that we're on. Ross Perot pointed out in 1992 with his little arrow, remember pointing to charts, the baby boomers are retiring. So one of the criticisms we get in the House is, why are you doing it now? You didn't do it under Bush. That's a fair shot, take it, because they didn't do it under Bush. But since 1992, we've had Democrat president, Republican president, Democrat president. We've had Democrat Congress, Republican Congress, and mixed Congresses, and nobody's done it. Nobody's done it. So if you want to blame one or the other, you're welcome to, but you need to blame both. You need to do like the point both ways because nobody solved the problem. So the next question is, well, why are y'all doing it now? You're just because it's President Obama. If you were born in 1946, last year you had your 65th birthday. If you're born in 1947, this year you had your 65th birthday. 2 years of baby boomers, 2 years worth of baby boomers are going to be retired before we address this. And so we started on it last year because the can cannot be kicked down the road. It has to be addressed, and it has to move forward, and it has to be addressed in an honest way. And we're willing to put anything on the table that needs to be put on the table. We talked about that even in the debt limit agreement. John Boehner even said, okay, Pat Toomey, who's one of the most pro-business members of the U.S. Senate, came up with a plan that would have given some compromise in moving forward in the debt limit, and the other side walked away from it, quite frankly. And it's finally coming out in a lot of literature that that's what happened. But I was for the debt limit because it has to be done, given the nature of Washington, the Debt Limit Commission, bipartisan. You can't do it any other way with parties representing different branches of government. So the one thing that I want to touch, and my fourth point, I'm just going to say this, is the one thing that's so important to me is workforce investment and making sure. Now, I think it needs to be done for Frankfurt, Indianapolis, and Nashville, and Atlanta, and Montgomery, and places like that. But I think as a national body, we have to have a policy to make sure people are trained as adults. You can't graduate from high school and college and have the same job you had, like my father had until he lost his job in 1980 recession for Ford. Thought he'd work there for the next 40 years. And so we have to have a system in our country that people can get the training and the needs they have, because you can't show up with a high school diploma in any business today and expect a first world wage. You have to have skills to bring to the table, and that's something we need to focus on. You have a great university here doing it. You have great KCTCS that Governor Patton put in place, and so I'm bipartisan. I think it's one of the best things that's happened in Kentucky in the last several years. Just before I got to the legislature was setting up a structure where we emphasize that, but that was done in Frankfurt. But we need to have a national perspective to make sure local governments and state governments can do that. And I'll close with this, because I'm going to get to questions, so I was all of that. So the question is, where are we? Well, there are big debates going to happen in Washington, and I really believe that that's worth having great discussions about, because it's really going to direct where we go in upward mobility for our children and grandchildren. Having a tax rate that's pro-growth, having a regulatory system that protects our air and water, but doesn't go to the extreme, and getting a handle on our debt so our children under our budget in 30 years, from my daughters my age, will have zero national debt. Zero national debt. So you're asking my generation with $15 trillion, as big as our economy right now. The budget the president put forth, it would be 180% of our economy in 10 years, which is worse than Greece right now. But we want to hand our children zero national debt. Now, you ask my daughter, when she's my age at 48, 30 years from now, if her children or my grandchildren will have a better future if you're dealing with a country that's government works and zero national debt. I think the answer will be yes. So can we do it? The best speech I've ever heard in Washington, D.C. I think we'll rise to the occasion. I'm an optimist. When I was 16 years old, I bought a 4-cylinder Pinto with a racing stripe and spoiler. Just in case, from 0 to 60 in about 4 miles, I needed some downforce. It was there. But we had a joint session of Congress, and the Prime Minister named Gillian Gillard from Australia came. She's probably early 50s. I think she was younger than me, but given what she said, she remembers this event. I sort of do, but she remembers it, so she has to be a little bit older than me. But she stood before us, and she said, what defines America from our parents' generation is that you saved us in World War II. Surprised a foreign leader came and said that in a foreign country, but she did. She goes, but what defines America in the minds of my generation was a moment when I was a little girl and I got sent home from school early so we could watch television, and you landed on the moon. She says, I'll never forget just looking at my mom and saying, wow, those Americans can do anything. With the right leadership, the right attitude, and the right willingness, and getting away from pettiness and getting to really big discussions on the big issues, which we absolutely have to do, and I'm commissioned to do, and I'm charged to do in Washington, we will do anything because we owe it to our kids. Thank you very much. I'd love to have questions. Anything's fair game. Any questions, fair game. Hi.
Hello.
Hey.
Received an email communication this morning from God's Pantry regarding the food stamp cuts. I'm a conservative-leaning person, and I do think there should be cuts. I'm not sure that's the right program to cut. Would you speak to that?
Yeah, as I said with food stamps, since 2008, we've gone from 28 million to 44 million people on food stamps. And what the cut, we didn't cut the bottom line dollar, I know this, so I'm not going to talk gimmicks. So yeah, the bottom line dollar does get cut in the end. What we did is let's establish the program back the way that it originally was set to be. So if you qualify for food stamps, you'll get food stamps under the way the program was set up, and then you have to spend it on food. We're going to make sure that we have fraud detection out there, making sure people aren't trading. I actually worked in a grocery store as a kid, teenager, so you could buy cigarettes for 90 cents back then, so you buy a piece of bubble gum, get the change back because they had coupons. Now they do it on debit cards, but there are ways that you can buy food and sell food. So there are things that we're trying to get to the core of the problem where people who qualify for the program get them. Now there's been a lot of money in the food stamp program, a lot of it through stimulus money over the last couple of years, which was one-time money. So the food stamp program expanded based on one-time money. And now that one-time money is gone. So the question is, are we going to borrow more money to maintain that level of the program, or go back and put the program what it was originally intended to do? So that's where the changes in food stamps are. They're not cuts to where you're saying that we're going to cut people out of it. Matter of fact, if you qualify under the original intent of the program, or the way the program is authorized, you don't get cut out of it. You don't. It just means you have to qualify independent of being in some other program. But it does take people off who are getting them that don't qualify under the regular program. It does save real money. I don't want to get into Washington speak because I don't want to give budget speak, but that's what I'm afraid I just did. So does that clear? Okay.
Congressman, since you, like many of us in this room, have college-age kids, would you talk a little bit about the activity going on right now about student interest loan rates?
Yeah, I guess 5 years ago is put in place that the student loan rate would, regardless of what the interest rate would be, it would be 3.4%. So that runs out. So it goes out this year, or this summer, so it would go up to double to 6.8%. We passed a bill out of the House of Representatives that prevented that from happening. And the way we paid for it was this: it was that it's about a $4 billion. We don't want to borrow more money because the kids are going to pay the debt back anyway. So we're putting more money on school debt. And I got two answers to that. We took it out of the health care bill, and there was a fund of about $4 billion that the secretary can spend on any program that she would like to spend it on, and said, why don't we put it back in the student loan business? Because this is what happened in the health care bill. People don't understand this. Up until last year, you could go to a bank and get a student loan, and then the loan was guaranteed by the government. You can't get a private student loan anymore. You only can get it from the government. You have to go to the federal government to get a student loan. You know why? Because they loan at 3.4%, but we borrow somewhere in the mid-twos. So we borrow in the mid-twos, and we loan at 3.4. Guess where that float goes? To the health care bill. $80 billion was taken from the student loan program and moved into the health care bill to pay for the health care bill. So we thought it was only fair to take that money back out of the health care bill and put it back into the student loan programs. That was in the president's health care bill. And anybody here wants to question me on that, that was the area of the health care bill that I worked on. Or tried to be up on, because I was on the Workforce and Labor Committee, and that's where that came from. And so and I said to Arnie Duncan, who's the secretary, I said, I may not disagree with what you're trying to do, but why don't you just loan at cost? Why don't we loan at 2.8%, I think is what we could have loaned, instead of taking the 0.6 and moving it over into another bill? Why don't we just give relief? Because I got an 18-year-old, I got two coming. And we've saved and saved and saved. I don't know if you can save enough money for college. And we feel like we were there, and all of a sudden. But the biggest thing in the health care bill that's going to affect colleges, and when I did my first, I got some great friends from the legislature. You guys are great legislators. You absolutely have great legislators and great friends. Both Susan and I came in together in 1998. Our first budget was $13 billion. $13 billion in 2000. I was driving around the district when they were in session doing the good work, and I heard that the new budget approved had $19 billion. So the last 10 years, or 12, it's gone up a third. Now, has colleges gone up a third in the last? I got Steve Byers from UK here. Furloughed employees, tuition's gone up. Everything's gone up around state government. Where's the money? It's in Medicaid, and quite frankly, state employee benefit and retiree benefits. So those accounts have just grown, and it's squeezing out everything else. The health care bill expands. The way they paid for the health care bill, remember, it's going to pay for itself. When they got to the final crunch, they just expanded Medicaid, which these state legislators sitting here are going to have to come up with 30% of the new expansion, and about $300 million, I think, over the next few years in the next rounds of budgets if we don't get a handle on the growth of Medicaid. And it's just squeezing out. We're going to be, all state governments, this isn't Kentucky, are going to be a Medicaid provider and an employee benefit provider, and everything else is going to fall by the wayside if we don't get a handle on the rising costs of health care. And the most part of the employee benefit side is the health care costs, which Governor Fletcher actually really tried to address and wasn't able to pull it off. But so college increases because of state aid to colleges, which have been squeezed out by mandates from federal government. And our budget would actually block grant Medicaid, so they would get a set fix of dollars, so that our legislators, instead of saying, I have to match what the federal government's sending, 30%, they can have the opportunity to manage their own program to make it work and make it fit within the pie. But I do think the 3.4% is going to stay. Now the question is how we're going to pay for it. We really believe the money should be taken back out of the health care bill and given back to students.
Congressman, you mentioned earlier the Prime Minister of Australia was very impressed that we landed somebody many times on the moon. When are we going to go back? We need to get NASA back in business. It's kind of embarrassing seeing our great astronauts and all that stuff riding on somebody else's rockets.
Yeah.
Anytime soon?
A friend of mine is from Houston, good friend. We've been talking about this the other day. Currently, the current administration's policy is not to put manned vehicles back into space. So right now, NASA's really trying to grapple with what its mission is. I don't see anywhere on the near horizon that's going to get the kind of money that it needs until we get a handle on. It's not just state government having to absorb this. Thank goodness they can't print money. But we're run out of money to print. And so what we have to do is get a handle on our budget so we can do the grand things that Spain explored and came here. I mean, and we explored the heavens and landed on the moon, and it showed what we could do as a country that had our purpose. I think I was a little young, but I think John F. Kennedy said it in the early 60s by the end of the decade, and we were there. And right now we need that kind of spiritual marshal to get this debt under control so we can invest in things that produce science and produce the great things that move our civilization forward. So I am pro doing it. I just don't see the money becoming available to do it anytime in the near future, unfortunately, because these programs are still growing with the baby boomers retiring. It's a demographic thing. President Obama didn't create the baby boom, but we have to deal with the baby boom retirement benefits. Any other? Good questions. Al's got a question, looks like.
So good to have you here.
Okay.
I really like how balanced you are in your thought processes. Our horse industry has taken a hit in the last 6 years, from a $7 billion industry to about a $5 billion industry. It could be a little bit off, but it's an amazing amount of decline. And then when you stop and think of how most people in this state have no idea that the aluminum industry is a $5 billion industry. So when you look at what's happening with the EPA, making regulations and really actually creating their own policy, I'm wondering how Congress feels about this EPA taking control and you no longer having control of what's so very important for our industries in this country, especially Kentucky.
Great question. What Susan's getting to is, Representative Westrum's getting to is the cap and trade bill didn't pass the Senate. It didn't become law. And the EPA's decided they're going to use every vagary in the law that they can find. So I've learned, and I said to my lawmakers, anytime you write a law, make sure you make it as specific as you can, because you don't give anybody the opportunity to interpret it any way that you didn't want to do so. But it's hard to tie somebody's hands so much in the future, so they're trying to find nuances in the law. They're doing it with the organized labor. They're doing it through the National Labor Relations Board. They're doing it through OSHA, and they're doing it through particularly the EPA to try to implement cap and trade, which I've been to Mexico City and I've been to Beijing, China. I don't want to walk around where people wear masks because they can't breathe. I mean, I said I was from a little farther south earlier, so I've confessed it. So I remember as a kid having to see how bad the weather was in Birmingham. The smog, to see if you walk out, we were outside of that area, but kids in Birmingham, don't let your kids play today. We don't want that, and we don't have that. But to go from a level of mercury we can't even measure and run our aluminum industry out of the country to countries where they're going to be worse polluters than, there's pollution that comes out of a smokestack. There's some level that comes out every time. And companies don't like that because pollution is really an efficiency going up your smokestack. And they try to fight that, but we can't have the problem is the imbalance of the executive branch. And I'm just reading a book on Woodrow Wilson who gets into that. And when he was in the 1880s, when he was a professor, except he thought Congress was too powerful. But the balance of how we balance that without moving forward and what we do. So the question is, what we can do about the regulation. When they put forth regulations like they did farm dust, the dust behind a tractor, when your tractor goes through the field and the dust comes behind it, that's a particulate matter that goes into the air, therefore you have to capture it. So we highlight that in a committee hearing. It's absurd, as we hear chuckles here. That is absurd, and they backed off of that. One, if you're a child on a farm that was the OSHA, you wouldn't be able to work on your family farm if you're under 16. And then they said, well, if the family wholly owns the farm, they can. Well, a lot of farmers are, I know one in Howardstown in Nelson County that is partners with a bunch of people. So his kids couldn't work on any plot of land that he owned as long as somebody was a co-owner. They finally backed off of that. 4-H couldn't even go out and do farm projects with their students if that passed. And so but there's some that they're just dead set on. The president will say, if it's State of the Union, that, I'm not for regulations, I want to make sure we grow. And then he'll say, but I'm not going to have dirty air and dirty. And we don't want that either. We just want common sense with it.
Congressman, are you interested in running for governor in 2015?
Am I interested in running? I'm interested in solving the problems we have in Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. is we got a lot of big issues, and they're not easy issues to solve. And I have never been one. I was actually moving back from graduate school when somebody talked about running for the state senate. So I've never been one to sit around and plot out what I'm going to do for the rest of my opportunities in my life. But I think we have big issues in Washington, D.C. we have to solve. And hopefully the people of the secondary, anybody here from Jessamine, Mercer, Boyle, or Garrett? It depends on what part of Jessamine you live in, but if you're in Wilmore, you're in my district. And so I'll be in this area a lot more and hopefully get to serve you in a way that after November that we'll solve these issues. They have to be solved. Thanks. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Congressman, for joining us today to share some of your policy views and also to give us some insight as to what our country can be. We want to officially welcome you to Central Kentucky and look forward, particularly the Public Policy Council and the Regional Public Policy Group, to work with you to make what we think is a very special part of the state even better. Kentucky American Water and our other sponsors, thank you for making this event possible. And to each of you who attended today, thank you for making this event successful. This meeting is adjourned, and please travel safely.